Hey everyone, and welcome to the show. Have you ever thought about what it actually means to be European? Not just like where you're from, but like that deeper sense of belonging.
Yeah, it's a question a lot of people are grappling with these days, especially with everything going on in the world.
Totally. And today we're diving deep into a book that tackles this head on. It's called Shades of Blue: Claiming Europe in the Age of Disintegration.
It's an academic work, but don't worry, it's not your typical dry read.
Not at all. You can find a link to the book in the description below. And hey, if you're liking these deep dives, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel.
So this book really gets you thinking about what it means to be European.
Right. The authors argue that there isn't this one single European identity.
Instead, they say there are all these multiple overlapping European senses of belonging.
Senses of belonging. I like that.
And these different senses of belonging, they're not just abstract ideas, they actually shape how people view Europe, its boundaries, its history, everything.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit. What are some examples of these senses of belonging in action?
Well, think about the founding fathers of the EU, like Jean Monnet and Robert Schuman.
Yeah, those names are practically synonymous with the EU.
Right. But the book points out that how these guys are perceived, it totally depends on where you are in Europe.
Oh, interesting.
For example, in France, there's this big emphasis on their French nationality. It's almost like, these are our national heroes who helped shape Europe.
I guess it makes sense. Every country wants to highlight its own contribution to this big European project, right?
Exactly. And in Italy, you might hear them adding names like Alcide Gasperi and Altiero Spinelli.
Oh, okay.
But Spinelli, he was a communist. So in Spain, for example, he's much less likely to be celebrated.
So even when it comes to figures who embody this idea of European unity,
Yeah.
there are still these national narratives that come into play.
Exactly. And it affects how these figures are remembered and celebrated.
Like everyone's building their own European Hall of Fame with different criteria for who gets in. But does this difference in perception go beyond historical figures? Does it affect how people actually define the boundaries of Europe itself?
Absolutely. That's where the book's concept of mental maps comes in.
Mental maps.
Yeah, it's the idea that these senses of belonging aren't just about feeling connected to Europe. They actually shape how people draw the borders of Europe in their minds.
So it's not just geography then. It's about deciding who's in and who's out of this mental club of Europe based on values or experiences.
Right. Think of it like a club, right, with different entry requirements.
Okay, I'm following.
Depending on who's in charge, the criteria for joining might change. Sometimes it's shared values, sometimes it's economics, sometimes it's historical ties. And the book goes deep into how these thresholds, they shift and evolve over time.
Can you give me a specific example? How do these, what did you call normative thresholds?
Yeah, normative thresholds.
How do they actually play out in how people see Europe?
Well, one example the book talks about is Europe as a guardian of citizens' security.
Okay, interesting.
This idea really resonates with people who feel like their national identity or their way of life is under threat.
So if someone feels like their country's facing instability or external pressures,
Exactly.
they might be more drawn to a strong, unified Europe that promises, stability and protection.
Precisely. That shared desire for security, it becomes like a normative threshold for entering the European house, as the book calls it.
The European house, I like that. So that's one way people draw those mental boundaries, right? Based on this need for security and protection.
Exactly. And the book calls this survivalist Europe.
Survivalist Europe, where the focus is on protecting European values and identity from perceived threats.
Exactly. And it's interesting, right? This whole survivalist Europe idea, it can actually be strengthened by conflict.
Wait, really? So going through tough times together can bring people closer to this idea of Europe. Huh.
Yeah. It seems counterintuitive, but the book makes this argument that shared experiences of conflict, even negative ones, they can reinforce a sense of shared identity.
I can see that happening on a national level, but it's wild to think about it on a continental scale.
Right. And the book uses the 2008 economic and financial crisis as an example. Remember how countries like Spain, Portugal, Greece, they felt totally abandoned by the EU?
Yeah, definitely.
There was this feeling that the EU had become like this new kind of economic dictator imposing all these austerity measures.
Yeah, that crisis really exposed some serious cracks in that idea of European solidarity.
For sure.
But are you saying that even though it was negative, that shared experience of hardship might have actually strengthened some people's sense of a shared Southern European identity?
Exactly. It shows how these, European senses of belonging, they aren't static. They're always evolving, being reshaped by shared experiences, good or bad.
Huh. Makes you think about what really binds people together, right? It's not just shared history or culture. It's those moments, those experiences where you say, wow, we're all in this together. So, with all these different European senses of belonging out there, the book must go into a bunch of different examples. Yeah. What are some of the big ones?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The book digs into several distinct European senses of belonging. Like each one offers a different perspective on what it means to be European. One that comes up a lot in political discussions is Christian Europe.
Christian Europe.
Yeah, it puts a huge emphasis on shared Christian heritage as like a defining characteristic of Europe.
I could see how that's become super relevant lately with all the debates about immigration and, immigrating Muslim communities into European society.
Totally. It often comes up in discussions about Europe's relationship with countries that have Muslim majorities, like Turkey, for example.
Right. Almost like drawing a line in the sand. This is what makes us European, and that's what makes them not.
Exactly, but then you have a sense of belonging, like Europe risen from the ashes.
Europe risen from the ashes. That one seems to focus more on a shared history of, like, overcoming adversity, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's all about overcoming past conflicts, especially World War II, creating a peaceful and unified Europe.
That would probably really resonates with older generations, the ones who lived through those conflicts.
Yeah, it's tied to that whole narrative of the EU as a peace project.
Right, right. A force for stability and cooperation in a world that's, still dealing with the trauma of war. Okay, so that's Europe risen from the ashes. And then there's, what was it called? Europe of Reconciliation. It seemed to go beyond just moving on from the past.
Yes, Europe of Reconciliation is all about actively confronting Europe's violent past, often through things like acts of remembrance, apologies.
It's about acknowledging that history shapes the present, right?
Yeah,
That reconciliation is an ongoing process, not just a one-time thing.
exactly.
It reminds me of that concept of devoir de mémoire, the duty to remember, not just acknowledging the past, but actually learning from it and using those lessons to guide what we do today.
You're totally connecting the dots there. The book actually has a whole section on self-reflexive Europe, the devoir de mémoire. It's all about that commitment to remembering past atrocities, especially the Holocaust, and applying those lessons to current challenges.
So it's like turning memory into action,
Right.
recognizing that we're not just like passive inheritors of the past. We have a responsibility to shape the future based on what we've learned. Wow. So we've got Christian Europe, Europe risen from the ashes, Europe of reconciliation, self-reflexive Europe, all powerful ways of thinking about what it means to be European. There was one more, right? Something about survival.
Ah, yes. Survivalist Europe. It's a newer sense of belonging. It came out of all the crises of the 21st century.
Right, right.
The global financial crisis, the rise of populism, the refugee crisis, all these things contributed to this feeling that Europe is under siege, that it needs to protect its values and identity.
It's like that image of circling the wagons, prioritizing the needs of existing EU members. More inward-looking perspective.
Exactly. It can lead to tougher border policies, skepticism towards more integration, and a focus on preserving what's seen as the core of European culture.
So after going through all these different European senses of belonging, what's the biggest takeaway you got from Shades of Blue? Did it give you a clear sense of what it means to be European?
You know, Shades of Blue doesn't really offer any easy answers, but what it does do is it gives you this framework for understanding how complex European identity really is.
Okay.
It encourages you to look beyond those simplistic statements like, I'm European, and really think about the layers of history, values, experiences that shape how people connect to this idea of Europe.
It's like the book is saying, stop trying to define European with a checklist. It's about understanding the forces that shape these constantly shifting, often overlapping senses of belonging.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that Europe isn't some static thing, but a dynamic force shaped by its past, present, and the choices we make for its future.
A dynamic force. I love that. So having explored all these different perspectives on European identity, what stood out to you the most from Shades of Blue?
I think what struck me most is that the book doesn't shy away from the uncomfortable parts of European history and how they still shape things today.
Yeah, it really makes you question that whole, romanticized view of Europe as this like beacon of unity and enlightenment.
Right.
It shows that these darker chapters, colonialism, conflict, economic disparities, they're all part of the story too. And we can't really understand Europe's present, let alone its future, but acknowledging them.
Exactly. And that's what makes Shades of Blue so valuable, I think. It doesn't just give you like a historical overview. It
Yeah.
gives you this framework for like really thinking critically about Europe.
Right.
for questioning assumptions and having these, meaningful conversations about what it means to be European today.
It's not about finding one right answer.
No.
It's about giving us the tools to grapple with these complex questions
Yeah,
and to see that there are many different ways of being European.
exactly. And I think that's a much more realistic and ultimately like enriching approach to understanding European identity.
Hmm.
It embraces the complexity, the dynamism of this whole idea of Europe.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. Shades of Blue really pushes us to, move beyond those surface-level understandings of what it means to be European
Yeah.
and to see the contradictions, the tensions that make up this idea of Europe.
It's about recognizing that Europe isn't a destination. It's a journey.
Oh, wow.
A journey that's always unfolding, always being reshaped by the choices we make.
Europe is a journey. It's beautiful. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Shades of Blue, here's something I want everyone listening to really consider. Given everything going on in the world right now, the war in Ukraine, the rise of nationalism, economic uncertainty, which of these European senses of belonging do you think will be most dominant in the years to come? And what kind of Europe will they create?
It's a tough question, but it's the one we all need to be asking ourselves because the future of Europe, it's being shaped right now.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, so please share them in the comments below. What resonated with you the most from Shades of Blue? Which sense of belonging do you connect with? And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our future deep dives. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, keep questioning. Thanks for joining us.